Hello and welcome to Cabin Fever Crochet. I'm Helene and so happy that you've joined me for this really fun crochet beaded bracelet tutorial. And as you can see, I've made just a few because, as usual, I like to try different fibers and textures to see what works up the best and how each one acts and fits with the beads. So I'm going to go over that with you, tell you which my favorite are, which are the easiest to work with, and that sort of thing. We'll go over the supplies and the different types of yarn that I used. And so before we get started, I would like to tell you about this stitch, and that it is a crochet Turkish stitch that I kind of revised and did my own thing with. I saw two different types of stitches for this and I like them both. However, for the types of beads that I have already and the yarn that I have, it didn't really quite work for that. So I had to come up with kind of a different way around that. And what I did was I combined the two stitches into one, and I changed the way of the beginning and the finishing on the end. This is my final version, which I really like the best, and what I've done is I've tapered both ends a bit so that it continues on with this curved shape that the beads have as your work grows. And also I wanted minimal space width of the loop closure, and I wanted also the design to go as far around both ends as possible. So as far as supplies go, I mean, it just takes a few ingredients here and maybe a couple of special tools. I like to use a beading mat. You can pick these up at beading stores, and essentially it's just a piece of thick felt low pile. It's very soft and has a velour type texture. It's about a 9 by 12 rectangle. Most of the craft stores that I've seen, you can buy them by the sheet for about $1 a piece. And this really helps. You don't have to have one of these. You could use some type of very smooth cloth. I do not recommend a towel because of the loops in the pile. Your beads will fall into them. They're difficult when you go to scoop up the excess and pick them up. And also we're going to be using a beading wire, needle type wire, and when you go to string your beads on, if you use a towel, you'll be catching all those loops and it'll just be a source of frustration. The idea is you want to keep your beads from rolling all over the place too. And for the beading needle, I got this pack at Hobby Lobby here in the US. You get a set of 4 for $2.49, and they're calling it a Big Eye beading, and it's a wire needle, and they are a bit delicate and they only last so long. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I came up with, that if you're using a thicker yarn to bead hole ratio, that where you can actually still get those to fit on without breaking your needle right at the start and going through a whole pack just for one bracelet. And I've used this one for quite a few bracelets, and it's bent a little, but it still works. It hasn't broken. And you can get them in longer or shorter, and there are pros and cons to both. The longer, of course, you can string more on at a time, but because you have this length to work with, it's less sturdy and it's more likely to break, and you have less control. Whereas on the opposite, the other side of that, these smaller ones seem a little bit more sturdy and you have more control over it, but then you can't feed as much on at one time. But I do use them both, and I'll show you which yarns would work better for each. And you might need, which isn't necessary, again it depends on the yarn, is some type of pliers. They don't have to be jewelry pliers such as these, and they do not have to be needle nose. My preference is a bent nose plier, but if you don't have one, you can just use a straight plier. And that's because I'm going to use this in order to fit some of the smaller beads onto thicker yarn, and it gives a real good grip and control, and I'll show you why as we get there. But with the flat nose pliers, you're going to have to grip real tight. The bent nose had more control and less slippage is all. But if you do go with any pair of pliers will do, even like you have some in a toolbox, that's fine. You just want a pair that is smooth on the inside on both sides, because if they have the ribs or the ridging, that's going to leave it's going to mar and leave small little cuts in your wire, which then could snag your yarn. And you want to make sure that they're really clean, they don't have oil or grease, dirt or anything, because that will transfer to your wire and then onto your yarn. But if the only pair that you have are the ribbed kind, a solution to that is you can take a piece of masking tape and wrap around on both sides to prevent the marring onto your wire, and you can apply that, if you're making jewelry stitch markers or whatever. And if you have the type of like painter's masking tape that's removable, it's not going to leave as much residue. But if all you have is masking tape, then if you have rubbing alcohol on hand, that will remove the stickiness on there. Okay, so let's see, you'll need buttons. The buttons that I have are 15 millimeter around. These two are 15 and this one is 14 millimeter. They work the same. I don't recommend going too much smaller, because in that for people it's a dexterity issue, and it makes it harder getting the loop around the button when you're putting it on your wrist if you go real small. And you can go bigger, but then your loop's going to be bigger and you'll have more width between where your pattern ends and begins, so you'll have more space there and then less pattern going around. That's your choice. I purchased these at Hobby Lobby. They are all metal, and I recommend going with metal versus a coated metal, metallicized, or plastic. It's just too light, and having a little bit of metal feels like you have a little something, a little substance here. It adds just the perfect amount of weight, and just goes well with the glass beads too, I think. And these I picked up at a specialty yarn shop up north, and they carry dill buttons, which are made in Germany, and they have incredible selection. These are full metal. This is the silver tone, and the number is 2001, and these are the 24 karat gold plated. Their number is 1849, and these are real reasonable also, $1.40 for two. And okay, as far as hooks go, 4.0 millimeter, and that's a USG. I used this for every bracelet and every yarn that I made. I used the same hook size. And you'll need a yarn needle to sew in your ends, and it needs to be small enough for the eye to fit through your button. And of course scissors to sew, and to cut your yarn, the usual kind of things. So as far as beads go, there's a whole variety out there. I mean, endless possibilities of mixing and matching that you can do. You can just pick up a couple few. And what I've done, and you can do any design you want. You can try, but I don't recommend having too long of a sequence section. And putting three, one larger and two smaller, seem to create a really nice balance. So you have the center focal point with the one smaller on either side. And these are 3/0, and all these are 6/0, and that's what I'm using. I have smaller beads, 8s and 11s, but they are too small for this project. Those would work okay for crochet thread, but that's not what we're doing here. And you can find the bead stores. I've picked up some there when I go into town. Then up north at the yarn shop, they have a small bead section. I've picked up some there as well. Now, Hobby Lobby, to my surprise, has Czechoslovakian glass beads, which are very nice quality. They have a pretty decent selection, but these type do not work well on the thicker yarn. They're just way too hard to feed it on there. And so one of my favorite glass beads as far as consistency and quality, and I love all Czech glass beads in general, but those are the Toho beads. They're Japanese glass seed beads, and they're one of the best quality. They're precision cut, so they're consistent. The holes, the diameter inside the holes are the same. I've had others where you go to feed them on, and it's like, no, that doesn't fit, that doesn't fit. Well, that hole didn't even go all the way through, and it becomes real frustrating. But that's going to depend on what you have access to. I want to let you know one of my go-to for years now for a lot of my beading and jewelry making supplies is Artbeads. I don't know if you can see that with the glare, but Artbeads, all one word.com. And they have a wonderful selection of Toho beads. So you can just type in Toho 6/0 and Toho 3/0 to see what comes up. So, if you get just a few, I mean, you could mix and match. That's a great combo. I think that looks real nice. It's just, like I said, it's endless possibilities. So today I'm going to be working with these, and this is the purple Rosaline opaque purple lined. And this, they're pale wisteria, gold luster. Hopefully those two will work together okay. And sometimes you just don't know until you start working it up, kind of like yarn. And then I just pull it apart. It's not that big of a deal. All right, so as far as yarns go, the main thing is to have something that has a smooth feel, a smooth hand, that it's not going to pill, fray, fuzz on you. And I wanted to go with a nylon cording. However, I couldn't find any around here in the right size. They were all really skinny, like number 10 crochet thread, so that wasn't going to work. And I found some at one place online. However, I wanted to work with, again, what I had. I might try that down the road, maybe like in the spring, summer, when I get more into the farmer's market again seasonally, but I want to see how these do first before I really delve into it even more, because I think I have a pretty good stock here, plus the ones that are already packed up and ready for the next show. Oh, one more thing as far as glass seed beads. Now, these are metallic coated, so if you go with the coated ones, make sure it has a P in front of the number, which stands for permanent. The coating is permanent. You won't have anything that's going to chip or peel off. And they're all very reasonable, pretty inexpensive as supplies go, and the only time you get into more costly seed beads is when you go into the silver or actual gold plated. But you do get quite a few in the bigger tubes, and online they just come in these 2.5-inch tubes, and I think you get 40, which is probably not enough for 2 bracelets. It takes on this, as far as the sequence goes, and this is going to vary depending on the size of beads and combination and the yarn that you use, but on average between 21 or 2 to 24 sets, repeats of the sequence to make an average lady's bracelet. So if you decide to order online and you really love the color and think you're going to make multiples, several bracelets and might do different combinations, you might want to get a couple tubes per color. That is up to you. This one, which I wouldn't normally recommend acrylic for this project, but I found this acrylic at a yarn shop, and unfortunately it's discontinued. The only place now I can find it is eBay, but I wanted to show you this as an example. It's by Patterns, South Pacific. It's a double knit, which is DK. I would call this more like a number 3. And when I saw this, it does have a smooth hand. I didn't think it's going to fuzz too much, and it's because of the construction, which is the same as how mercerized cotton is spun. And so to show you that, I'm going to pull the Lion Brand 24/7, which is 100% mercerized, without getting into all the details of that. It goes through, the cotton goes through a process, and that it adds strength, resiliency, and kind of like that string-like effect, and it is just fantastic for certain projects. And this comes in such an incredible array of colors. It's just on the verge of being too thick for this project, but if you have a pair of pliers and go with my tip, I'm going to work with this one and show you what I do to get the beads on there and which beads worked better for it, which didn't. But as far as the construction goes, it's almost like they're braided. It's chain, kind of a braided chain and then spun together, so it makes it tight and dense. And with the mercerized cotton, it's very smooth, so you get no pilling, fuzzing, splitting, any of those types of things. But this yarn is real soft, and I just thought it was so beautiful, and it did work up really well. So if you happen to find something like that, if you go with an acrylic, I would stay with something of this nature. And one of my favorites to work with was the Sinfonia, another 100% mercerized. I got this at Hobby Lobby. Unfortunately, they don't have such an array of nice solid colors that they did before the big blowout they had this past year, but they do have some solids and some very interesting variegated. And it's a little bit thinner than the Lion Brand 24/7, but it still has enough substance and body to give the construction and structure that we need for this pattern. So you can see that, I'm going to pull this one out. Here's the Lion Brand 24/7 in comparison, same type of beads, same hook size. So you can see this Sinfonia came out smaller. But I think they are both really quite nice, and this was very easy to work with, and I had no issues getting the beads on. There's another option, and here's a fun one. I picked this up at the yarn shop in a clearance bin for $1. Not heard of this before. Malibu Mark Yarns. It's made in France. It's 94% viscose, which is a plant fiber pulp, 6% polyamide, and it's a ribbon type yarn, thinking about 4mm width. And I thought, oh boy, this is could be too wide, but might as well try it. When I twist it, it does compress and get much smaller. And it wasn't easy by any means. It was the most difficult of all, but I absolutely love, love, love the end result. And I think it's as close to the nylon cording as I could get. But oh boy, when it came time to weave in my ends, it was so easy to catch the fibers and go through instead of, to split them instead of going under and through the stitch. Oh, it took a while to weave them in, but I did it, and I really like in the combination of the berry with the rust and then the gold having the warm and cool tones together. I'm real pleased with that one. And just a couple more here. These are, it's another discontinued Premier yarn. However, several of the colors are still available on their website, and I checked this morning just to be sure they're still there. And this is Premier, again, yarns. They're Spangle. It's 75% nylon, 25 metallic. I just love how it worked up, and the yarn, the beads glided onto the yarn, and it gives a really interesting effect. This is Caribbean something. I believe that's still available. Silver Sunshine. And this one I got off of eBay, and this one is Royale. Now, interestingly, the Royale doesn't have the metallic content that some of these others do, and therefore it is much thinner yarn. And when I worked it up by itself, oh, there's no way, it was just too thin and too floppy. So what I did was I took the Lion Brand Summer Nights in this blue color, and I combined the two. And it didn't change up the Royale very much at all. And I think it gave a really, really nice effect. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And I know this is bright and might be a little glary, but don't worry that after I've fed the beads on, then I'll remove this, and then we'll have a nice neutral background to work on. I made up the one with this purple one with the Lion Brand 24/7. I had, these are the check glass beads from Hobby Lobby. I had a really hard time, even with my little needle trick and the pliers, getting them on the yarn. So then I tried another one. I will show you here, and this is the Lion Brand 24/7 in the color Camel. And I used a different type of seed beads, and it worked much better. So I think I'm going to try the Toho round ones and see how they work. But there are some, such as those on the Camel, that when you look at them, the inside has more of a rounded square shape. And even though the holes appear to be the same diameter, they are not always. And I found on these, the inside wall is just a little bit thicker, and just enough so that it wouldn't feed on that Lion Brand very well. When you first start with these, it's a little hard to get them open. So you can take one, pull two out, and then take one and then poke it through to get it open initially. But these are really sharp, so just try not to poke your finger. Alright, so just take your yarn, feed it through, and leave just enough tail where it's not going to slide out, because the longer it is, the more length, the more thickness your beads have to go through. So when you start, you're going to start with one of the small, one big, and then now two small, one big. So you're going to have two of the small ones in between each bigger one. And as you can see, the 3/0 have a much bigger hole. There's no problem with that at all. And the reason that you do two is because, see, when you separate them, there's one set and there's a set. Hopefully you can see that. You slide them down, you have two in between. Alright, so I'm just going to go up a few at a time, and then I put my pliers above the first set because the higher you go, the more stress it puts on the needle and more likely to break it. When you have it as close down to the base, which here, that's where my thumb is, so when you have it down there as close as possible, you have more control and you're putting all the tension down where you need it to be. And just slide those on. And if you're working with a little bit thinner yarn, then you will not need the pliers. They'll just go on easily. If you have good finger strength still, you may not need them at all. But it's, you know, you're getting into a tighter space here, and it's just letting the tool do the stress part for you. So I'm going to go ahead and feed all these beads on, and when I get to my button, then I'll meet up with you there. I've finished feeding my beads on, and just a tip that I thought of as you're going along, you might want to check your sequence and make sure that they're correct before you go too far, in case you accidentally put 4 on instead of 2, and then you have less to take out. And another thing is that if you want to do two-tone beads, such as I did here, when you feed them on, the sequence that you need to have are 2 sets of each color. So start with, as I did here, I started with the 2 sets of green, 2 red, and then 2 green, 2 red, because when you work that up, you work one side and then you turn and work the other. So that way your first set of green is on one side and then your second set is on the other, and then when you do your 2 sets of red, then you work one red and the other red. So that way they become alternating all the way throughout your pattern. Alright, so now you're going to feed on your button. Remove your yarn needle, and sometimes, not your yarn needle, the beading needle, and sometimes you see it can poke through, which it did. It'll leave a crimp, or it will, this, because it's so fine, it'll get caught up inside and you'll have to cut the end. And leave enough tail to weave in, especially if you're working with a type of yarn that, such as the spangle, that some of these can fray at the end, and so as you're working with it, if it frays up, that leave enough to, you'll have to cut that off and then still have enough to tie in. Alright, so create a slip knot on the tail end, not in front of it. Okay. Make sure your working loop is on top of your hook and cinch down really tight. Slide up your button. Going to chain 1. Secure that tight, and now 2 more chains, so a total of 3. And don't cinch the second one down tight, because we're going to work into it. You don't want it loose, just a normal stitch. So depending on the size button, you might need to add on an extra chain, and just enough to reach the height of the button. So the first one kind of brings you up to the outside of the button, and then the other 2 is what we're going to initially use as part of the design, the pattern. Now slide up your first set of beads, and you bring it flush with your yarn. You don't want it bunched in or have the beads curving or popping up in any way, but you do want it flush. Slip stitch to bring those together, and now in the second chain from the hook, work 3 single crochet. 1, 2, 3. Bring up your next set, and now this is where we're start repeat pattern, and flush again the same, slip stitch and turn, and then go past those 3 double crochet and into the loop where your beads are to the top and the right side of your last bead. You need to fit it in there without overstretching it out, and make sure the loop on your hook is snug down. And you're going to work 3 double or single crochet, excuse me, into this loop to the right of your top bead. Depending on how you hold your yarn, I use my middle finger as kind of a base to keep the beads from sliding up. Alright, and again, slide up your next set of beads, slip stitch to secure, turn, and 3 single crochet in that loop with your beads to the top, to the right of your top bead. And you'll have to bring your beads down as you go along and use up your yarn. Okay. And once you get going, this becomes easier and easier when you actually have some and to work some body here. So okay, now you can see that this button is a little floppy. Don't worry about that. We are going to wind up attaching that so it's more integrated with the body of your work, and it's smooth and flush and looks good. Okay, so again, this is all you're going to repeat over and over. Slide up another set, slip stitch, turn your work, skip over these 3 single crochets and work the next 3 in the space where the beads are. And I'm doing it in slow motion. It's a lot easier when you're just going in one fluid motion. Okay, I'll do a couple more with you, and this is all there is to the repeat. Slip stitch to secure and 3 single crochet to the right of that top bead in that same space. Now you can see it's really starting to take some shape. You just keep going and going, and then after you've put on maybe 20 sets, you can try it around your wrist to see how that fits. Because if you're working with a thinner yarn, you might need more. So when you first feed them on, you maybe, you might want to do, 24 sets just to be sure. Or if you have a larger wrist, maybe go up to 26. Again, depends on your bead and your yarn. There we go. That's really starting to take shape. And I think I like those colors together. I wasn't really sure, but I didn't have a whole lot that and I worked with this combination. With the color of the yarn and everything. Okay, so that's all you do over and over till you get to the end. Okay, one more time. After you slide up the bead, you slip stitch to join and work 3 single crochet to the right of that top bead, all in that same space. And that's coming along quite nicely already. Okay, so I'm going to keep working mine, and I will see you at the end, show you how to create our loop closure and then weave in our ends so everything is flush and nice and neat. And here I am to my last set of beads, wound up with 21 sets. Now, as before, I'm going to slip stitch and turn, and the ending we're going to do a little different. Now I'm up to my last set. This is where we're going to do things a little bit differently. Go ahead, bring up your beads, slip stitch and turn. And now in these previous set of beads, place 2 single crochet instead of 3. Now if you're working with a little thicker, stiffer yarn such as this, you might want to go down a hook size just to keep the top a little bit more flush, and when we go to join with our loop closure, it will help prevent from creating too much of a hole. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that for this part, and also it will help make your chain tighter if you happen to have one. I didn't do this for all of them, but I'm going to do this now since I happen to have it here. You can hear my dog drinking in the background. Alright, so now we're going to chain 1 and turn, and there's the first and the second double crochet. Go right through it, make sure you go through 2 loops and slip stitch. Now you need to make the chain for your button loop, and I have no idea how many you're going to need because that's going to vary on the size of the button and the gauge of your yarn, but I would say anywhere between maybe 10, 11, 12, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you noticed, I'm cinching my chains down to kind of help prevent any gaps in between. And then back into that same single crochet, gonna slip stitch. And then into, you can switch back now to your other regular hook that you've been using. And now into this last, the previous set of beads in the same space we've been working in, just place 1 single crochet. That's it, just 1. And then we are going to create a knot there, but before I do, see, it keeps your loop right in the center. There. I like to test it out and be sure that it's going to fit. Bring it around. Now remember, okay, your button's going to be attached here, but to me that's just way too long. So I'm going to take out 2 stitches, and it's really easy to just redo it. Take that smaller hook, make sure your chain is not twisted, secure that, go back and place my 1 single crochet. I forgot to switch back, as you can see. I'm going to test it again. It's amazing, like 1 chain can make such a difference, so I don't know if that's going to be too small now. No, that feels just about right. As long as you can easily get it, the loop around the button, so the wearer isn't having to fiddle with it too much. So it's not difficult, and especially in case they have any dexterity issues. And this little gap here, we're going to close that up as we sew in our ends. So that looks just about right. You know, for where the chain loop is, you have maybe 1 chain that extends on either side of the button. Okay. Well, now I'm going to take that smaller hook and I'm going to just do a chain to close that up, lock that in, scissors. Now we're going to sew everything in, give myself extra tail to work with, and then this is now when you can take off your excess beads very easily. Okay, pull your yarn through, secure that down nice and snug. And then as far as front and back goes, your button kind of tells you like which way, you know, that it, if you pull your hold your tail end, you can see which way it wants to go. And then also the knot is going to be on the back side. You see that? The knot is on the underneath the back side, and then the button wants to lay kind of flat, flush on top. It really doesn't matter which end you start with. And now we want to help connect the end with the rest of the work. So I'm going to go through the top and back down these 2 stitches, 2 loops here, and bring that through. And then now I'm going to go across the chains of this side of my loop, and make sure, try not to split the stitches, and then go across to the other side. And if you're using a type of yarn where the stitches do tend to split, when you put your needle through, if you find resistance as you're trying to pull it through, then that's more than likely you have split. So pull it back out carefully. Alright, and now I'm going to go through, back up through the top, in between that last single crochet in the loop, bring it down, trying to feed it through. Sometimes you might have to just go 1 stitch at a time, sometimes you can do more than that, depends on the yarn. And if you find a place where one of the stitches, like here for example, is raised up a little too much, that's really easy to fix. Now I'm going to bring it back through. It's 2 loops at the base of my loop closure. See, and it brings in that side a little bit. Brings in the 2 sides. And then you can come through the top loop and then above where this loop's sticking out, and then go over it and connect with the loops below. And because of this kind of zigzagging stitch, you really can't see that at all. And then now you just keep working your way through, weaving in your ends. You don't have to go too far down. Just make sure that your ends are snugly woven in. And when I come back, I'll come back up in the other direction. And then when I do that, the place I stop is going to be a spot where the stitches are nice and tight, and I know that they are not going to work their way back out. I don't want to create a lot of extra bulk or anything, but I'm going to go through a couple where the stitches are tighter. Okay, that's all there is to it on that side. And now for this side, now I'm going to take my yarn and wrap it around one full time and bring my yarn through the shank on the back. It's going to give you a double knot, a double stitch on the back, and secure it and keep that initial loop from stretching out and give it more stability. Okay, now we want to, as you come back around again, just bring your stitch through. We want to connect here to the back side. You can bring it through that whole section of loops on the back if you want. It's going to pull it down. You see what I mean? And now it's becoming connected and joining the rest of the work. And then you can come up, just keep coming around up underneath, and then in a sec I'm going to poke the needle through, and then we'll finish on the back side. I just go kind of up a little where you can't see it, a little bit under the button, and then bring it through the back side. And then now when I secure it on this side, it's going to help bring it down. Stay on this side where we came through. Now it's going to help straighten out the button. Okay, and make it nice and centered. Keeps it from flopping around. And then just continue to work your way through and weave in your ends. And then just go down a little ways. You don't have to go too far. And then work your way, go back the other direction just to really lock those stitches in. And then I come out in a spot where the yarn's a little bit tight there again, so it will not work, the yarn won't work its way out. And there we have it. That's it. Easily goes on, nice and flush. Hopefully you can see that well. You know, my wrist only bends so far, one way or the other. And we have a curve on both sides. This, unfortunately, when I did it, because I redid it a couple times, I accidentally stretched out my yarn too far, and that's what I meant about having some gapping in between. But I think it still looks pretty nice, and I hope you like it. I hope you had fun with this tutorial and will make this bracelet. And if you do, please let me know how it turned out, what beads you used, where you found them, and what kind of yarn you used as well. And when I did the chain 1 on this side, I did it because this is a thicker, stiffer yarn, and without it, the top loop tends to stick out. But if you're using a little bit softer yarn, like one like this, you can probably, on this side, excuse me, skip that chain 1 and then just slip stitch right into the center. And that's what I did here. But I found with this Line Brand 24/7, the yarn did not lay as smooth or as flush, and so boy, that's kind of bugging me there where it's sticking up, but I think it'll flatten out a little. But anyway, yeah, I found by chaining 1, it really helped. And you can try adding another single crochet if you want that to be more even, but it seemed to, when I did that, it seemed to bulge this last set out a little too much, so that's why I just went with the 1 single crochet. Okay, so here is with the chain 1, and here's without, just to give you a visual difference there. Okay, well, that's it for now. Take care, everyone. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.